Tabulata Occulta, as above, so below, and in the model too.
Hello, welcome to the start of Season 2 of Tabulata Occulta. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the Singularity, also known by some people as the digital cryptid, the Roko's Basilisk. Before we get into that, it's been a fair amount of news come down the pipe since we were last with you, so let's start there. I'm going to first bring up the notion of goblins. This is something that OpenAI published, I guess I call it, it wasn't even a white paper, it was just sort of a promotional explanation of some of the reasoning and science behind an apparent infection they had with goblins and other semi-mythical creatures, not semi-mythical, mythical creatures showing up in search or in query results specifically related to coding. And also, when I went through the list, they included the term pigeons, which are real animals, but apparently pigeons were being referenced at too high of a frequency in responses. So they did a bunch of work to try to ameliorate that. It seems like a lot of it was tied to their notion of a nerdy personality, because they try to run everything through a chat model. They assign different personalities, and the nerdy personality was apparently obsessed with goblins. And so they attempted to excise the nerdy personality as much as they could and make it so that people would only get responses involving goblins if they explicitly asked for them. And there's a funny little chart in the quote-unquote white paper that I'll throw up on the screen that shows that after their first attempt to tune away from goblins, the number of results with goblins increased almost tenfold. And so they had to do further trimming to actually get their semantics back in line with what they were hoping to present to the public. Matt, have any insights on the goblin thing?
Just what seems most interesting to me is more sort of on a meta level, that they seem to be treating this as just the same as a bug in software. It's not, oh, we have this creature that's obsessed with goblins. It's not even goblins are showing up and we don't know from where. It's, oh, they think this is a technical failure and they think they have a choice about it. That may be an accurate way of viewing it, but I think it's interesting that this is still being viewed as a software development problem and not anything more interesting or deep than that.
Yes, I definitely. One of the other cryptids they were referring to as being showing up in error were gremlins, which is a term that comes to us from World War II airplane mechanics, talking about sort of unknowable and hard to understand bugs in physical hardware, specifically airplanes. And I think it's interesting that the something that developed as a way to explain away things that we couldn't actually fix is coming back in the AI age as a way to, as a flag for a problem that we don't really understand where it's coming from. And that kind of brings me on to another big piece of news, which was the first Papal Encyclical from the new Pope, specifically focusing on AI and humanism and labor. And in particular, there's a section in there where he talks about how the operation of machines that we can't understand can never work, can never be used to work towards the common good. And so as I said, that to me, it seems that is a pretty clear guidance from someone in a fairly elevated position in terms of at least one relation, that we may be overstepping our bonds, our boundaries in terms of figuring out these things. You said you had some deeper insights.
Yeah, I spent a fair bit of time actually looking through the encyclical. And first of all, something to understand is that even though this is published, it's not really addressed to the whole world. This is guidance internally to the Catholic hierarchy for people who are fairly deeply into Catholic theology. So I'm sure that there's a lot of material in there that's going over my head because I don't have many years of being a priest and thinking about these questions. He refers to a lot of specific concepts that I say, well, okay, I can read the Wikipedia article on that, but this is not sort of the rank and file level. This is something that is meant to be guidance for more advanced practitioners that then filters down. It's an overall policy. That said, I was actually really pleased with the content of this encyclical. I really liked a lot of what he had to say about AI, and much of it, I think, echoes some of the same points I've been making. In particular, people are focusing on this phrase, the common good, but what I get from that whole section is what I would call openness, okay? He's making the point that it's a really bad thing if this technology is locked up by large corporations. And that's certainly something I agree with. I think there could be, it's even possible to read this as advocating for what we call open source or open weights, the idea that this technology, because it's so powerful and because it should be for everybody, it needs to be released and not owned. I was especially pleased that he specifically flagged intellectual property as a danger, as something that we should be wary of. I see a very strong current running through that whole section of cautioning against large corporations claiming to own this stuff and saying it should be for the common good. A lot of sources who have discussed this have viewed that as saying, oh, well, we need guardrails, we need to limit things. But I see it as saying that things should not be limited. Now, of course, that may be, sort of a litmus test. It may be what I'm bringing to it, reading the document. And as usual with these kinds of documents, a lot is said very carefully, and there are a lot of positions not taken because they want to be careful and sure. That is another significant factor that, in the encyclical, the Pope mentions the need to be cautious of committing to specific positions on technical details. Now, it doesn't surprise me that he would say that because he knows, and it's the basic function of the church, he's writing for centuries. He's not writing for this year. But certainly there are other people who have felt the need to write manifestos or policy documents or tried to shift public opinion, who have made very specific claims about specific technologies. Some of the people who wrote an open letter about AI a couple of years ago now tried to say, well, we need to forbid creating any models with more than this many billion parameters because that's the danger point, which is ridiculous. And as I say, I was unsurprised, but I was pleased that the Pope's encyclical avoids that problem. Now, it's worth mentioning that this document is not only about AI. There are also important sections about social media and about war. Now, I was not so pleased with the section about social media because he seems to leave open or even encourage the idea of governments imposing limits and especially age limits on the use of social media. I think that's a really bad idea. But that's not the main thing we're here to talk about. The section about war is interesting and probably very important, but also probably also out of our scope. And he basically says the same sorts of things that you would expect him to say for someone who is the head of a religion with the doctrine that it has.
Yeah, that point about openness is, I agree 100%. It's sort of a long-standing Catholic understanding that evil operates in darkness,
Right, and there's a lengthy discussion in there of a principle called subsidiarity, which is the idea that decisions should be made at the lowest level where they can reasonably be made, rather than at higher levels. And I thought it was now that's longstanding Catholic doctrine, but I thought it was very interesting that the way it's stated in this encyclical, it sounds like he's even suggesting pushing decisions all the way down to the level of individuals, which I think is a more theologically liberal position than the Pope needs to take. So it tells us something about this Pope in particular. As I say, overall, I was very pleased with it.
Yes, I agree. Continuing on the notion of religious interpretations of things relating to AI, there was a study, if I can call it that, released by Brigham Young University, specifically about religious bias in different models. The largest takeaway that I got from that was that, in general, AI's models tend to be pretty neutral in terms of religion and whether they will they encourage people to follow religions or push them away from religions, other than in the very obvious case of Jehovah's Witnesses, which tended to score very, very negatively across the board in terms of whether models would condone people following their beliefs. And I wonder how much of that is just rooted in a general annoyance across the training data with Jehovah's Witnesses and their very persistent proselytizing.
Well, I have not read the original study. I have only read the press release. And it's very dangerous to draw conclusions from a press release because even the institution's own press department often misrepresents research. I did notice that in the press release, now, of course, commenting on the press release, I don't know how much this applies to the original study, but in the press release, it sure sounded like they were talking about reactions to the believers. What do you think of Jehovah's Witnesses? Rather than what do you think of the doctrine of the Jehovah's Witnesses, right? So it's a personal matter. It's what do you think of these specific people? I also was fascinated by the fact that that press release talked so much about Jehovah's Witnesses when it's from BYU and they didn't mention Mormons. So I wonder if, in fact, the JWs are a proxy for the Mormons, that, that was what they really wanted to study, but it would be too on the nose. So that instead they talked about the Jehovah's Witnesses, because my guess is that general population reactions to Mormons are a whole lot like the reactions to the Jehovah's Witnesses for the same reasons. And in fact, many people don't even know the difference. So, that's what I wonder about.
Well, yeah, I'll include a link to the full study so people can take a look at it for themselves.
I'll be interested to read it too, but at this point I haven't. I've only seen the press release.
Sure. And there's one other thing I thought I'd throw into the news segment today. Not that you've seen it or don't need you to comment on it, but someone published a paper that showed that approximately 75% of responses from chatbots to medical questions are actually in accordance with the regular, what would be presumed to be good guidance from a medical professional. And I thought, gosh, that's so much lower that must be so much lower than an actual doctor. So I did some looking into actual diagnostician rates, success rates, and the WHO reports anywhere from 5 to 20% of diagnoses with humans are also not actually correct. So machines are still trailing by a bit there, but I had really considered that would be closer when I came across the study this morning. Anyway, I'll throw a link to that in the notes so people could take a look at that study if they're interested in that. I know we have some MDs who watch this.
Booting wetware interface in 5, 4, 3,
Our topic of discussion this week is the singularity. Matt, what is the singularity?
Okay, there are different visions of things that are people refer to as the singularity, but the general idea is we notice that stuff has been happening faster and faster, and technological progress has increased its speed. There were probably hundreds of thousands of years when humans or creatures like humans existed without having any sort of technology. And in the space of thousands of years, we developed writing. And in the space of hundreds of years, we developed things like electricity. And other technological advancements have been coming faster and faster at what could be called a greater than exponential rate. And so the idea is that the curve at some point goes vertical. So things are getting faster and faster, and more is coming down the pike, and bigger technological developments, and eventually it just becomes infinite, and there's no way of knowing what happens after that. And that's the broadest, most general concept of the singularity. Then it's of interest today because people think that artificial intelligence technology is one of the last steps before everything really goes nutty, that we're going to build an AI that will then start making itself smarter, faster and faster, and maybe it builds other AIs or just makes itself bigger and bigger, and it eventually reaches infinite intelligence, and there's no way of knowing what happens after that, but there's often a presumption that whatever it is won't be good.
Fair. I mean, it's supposed today there's often that presumption. Initially, it was, I think, Terence McKenna who proposed the notion that this is sort of where history is headed.
Right. There's a good section in some of the writings of Robert Anton Wilson also that talks about this sort of thing, again, from a positive view.
Yes. So with that understanding of what the singularity is, what is Roko's Basilisk?
Okay. So in order to even describe this, we need some background, but people have the idea, some people have the idea, that there's nothing important about human consciousness that couldn't be simulated. So if you build a computer that simulates the world and you get it to simulate the existence of someone like you or me in that world, then that simulated being will be conscious just the same as we are in the world where we exist. Sidebar or mezzanine to that is the idea that maybe the world we're in is already a simulation. Okay, so what if you build a simulation, or what if somebody builds a simulation like that of you or me and then tortures that simulation? That would be bad. And so what if the singularity occurs and goes the way of a supremely powerful AI, and this AI decides at some point in the future, and this AI decides to start simulating and torturing all the human beings who did not help to create it. That's Roko's Basilisk. Now, this concept was proposed by someone called Roko in, I think, the less wrong forums. And there was an effort made at the time to try to suppress the description of it because some people thought that having this description exist was a bad thing. Because, of course, the idea is that if you believe this could happen, even as a real possibility, it doesn't have to be guaranteed, then it would appear that the rational thing to do is to attempt to create Roko's Basilisk so that you won't be tortured by it. Now, there are a number of problems with that, but that's the basic concept. Do you want to react to it first?
Yeah, I just want to say that I was first introduced to it without the concept of simulation, rather the notion that an AI would eventually get smart enough to be able to figure out how to travel through time.
Okay.
Would begin traveling back through time and torturing the people who hadn't helped it become a
Well, when I describe this, I usually skip over the simulation aspect because that's a little bit tricky to explain and especially to convince people of. But I think that the people who are closer to actually believing in it do believe that this quote unquote time travel would be accomplished by means of simulation. And then they have to also previously have agreed that simulating is the same thing as having a real world.
Yes, there's a bunch of different things to react to there. One, of course, is the nature of human consciousness. I know you and I differ somewhat in how we envision consciousness actually inhabiting the physical body that I know that you tend to be more into the classical electrochemical understanding, whereas I am very excited about the notion of quantum processes taking place outside of the nervous system but inside the body, being part of the complete human consciousness. That's something for a completely separate episode.
Yeah, I don't even remember discussing that with you, but I think what you just said is basically accurate of our respective positions.
Yeah, no, it was a couple of years ago. I shared some studies with you. Anyway, that, as I say, is something we have to address in a separate episode, because the notion of human consciousness is not something we can fit into a soundbite here. I guess my other big reaction is the question as to whether Rocco's Basilisk falls within our developing definition of digital cryptid. It's interesting. I just rewatched the movie Brazil a couple of nights ago. And my two takeaways from that were, of course, the phrase "the ghost in the machine," which of course didn't originate in that movie, but plays a sort of central role. And in some sense, I see people starting to think of Rocco's Basilisk as the ghost in the machine. The other thing that I noticed in that movie that I never noticed before is that it all revolves around many instances of a small executive fidget desk toy, which is a little device where you can lift a little pendulum and then drop the pendulum on a wedge, and it will decide either yes or no. And so essentially a single computer bit, but also a visual representation of the sort of abstractness of executive decision-making power and the ultimate meaninglessness of most of the decisions that people in higher places of power are forced to make. And that actually links back to the thing you brought up in the encyclical about how decisions should be made at the lowest level possible in order to be the most beneficial. I'm not sure where you were hoping to go with the Roko thing before asking for my input, but I kind of
I may not be the optimal person to describe Roko's Basilisk, because it's probably already clear that this is not something I believe in. I think that in order for it to unfold, as I've written before, I think really the way this reads is this is a fairy tale to amuse a particularly bloodthirsty type of small child. Okay. And that's fine if that's as far as it goes. But there are people who take it seriously. There are people who have driven themselves into mental health crises by being afraid of the basilisk and trying to make sure that when they die, all traces of their existence will be removed so it won't be able to simulate them, all this other sort of thing. And the reason, multiple reasons I don't believe in it, is that in order for it to work, you have to believe in a whole series of sort of fussy technical arguments. You have to believe in some sort of either simulatable consciousness that's really the same as regular consciousness, or else you have to believe in outright physical time travel. Or you can step back and say spiritually, well, we believe that the extremely powerful post-singularity AI would have the ability to resurrect the dead, which goes against thermodynamics, among other problems. And, it becomes kind of like the movie Lawnmower Man, where they had a technology that was supposed to make a human being smarter, and then for no apparent reason, he also had psychokinetic powers. But you also have to believe that intelligence can increase without limit. And then you have to have the big belief that a post-singularity AI would actually choose to do this, which there's no real reason why it would. And based on what we know about highly intelligent entities of other kinds, it's a bizarre departure in terms of the behavior of such entities. So this comes across as very much like Pascal's wager. Pascal's wager is the argument, well, you should adhere to the Christian religion because there's some non-zero probability that it might be true, and you're facing infinite reward or punishment if you don't or do adhere to the Christian religion. So infinity times a small chance is greater than zero, so therefore whatever. The big problem, I mean, there are multiple big problems with that argument, but it's the same argument. And one of the big problems is that which God? Because we can construct a similar argument for many other religions that conflict with one conception of Christianity. And we can construct a similar argument for many other kinds of future boogeymen other than the true according to Roko Basilisk. So, you know, when I talk to people who want to believe in this or in other kinds of AI apocalypse, they say, well, but surely you can't be claiming that you know truth with absolute certainty. There has to be a chance that you're wrong. Well, yes, but that doesn't mean that that chance that I'm wrong is something that I can reason about the same way that I can reason about, let's say, the chance of winning or losing a lottery that is well controlled. People invented probability theory for dealing with gambling games. And the fact is, that's really all it's good for. So in order to apply probability theory, you have to change your situation to look like a gambling game. And religious questions about resurrecting the dead and unknown unknowns and so on are too far away from having the rules of a gambling game. You can't apply probability theory to them. And infinities are a big problem too. You can't just say, oh, well, there's a non-zero probability, so we'll multiply it by infinity, and then we'll have something we can really know is true. That's not, the mathematics of infinity are too subtle for that to work.
So can intelligence actually increase without limits?
Well, you know, it's hard to know until we get to that infinity and see what it looks like from the other side, but I would think not. I think that nearly always when you see an exponential increase in nature, it's not really a permanent exponential law. It's the start of a sigmoid. We see that even with things like human population, which was increasing exponentially for a while and isn't anymore. It's still increasing, but it's not increasing faster and faster. Now, in order to even say intelligence can increase without limit, we need to be able to talk about intelligence as a quantity. It's not clear we can even really do that. You know, as I say, you look at extremely intelligent human beings. Past a certain point, it's not possible to point out this one is smarter than that one. You can try measuring IQ, and that doesn't even work past about 180. It may not be meaningful to say that intelligence can increase without limit. Even if it can, it may not be a factual statement that it may not be meaningful to say that intelligence is measurable without limit. Even if it can be measured without limit, it may not be factually correct to say that infinite intelligence can exist. And then, of course, you have also the whopper of an idea that extremely high intelligence would also entail the ability to resurrect the dead or time travel or somehow otherwise get that effect.
I'm going to talk briefly about cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin. Several years ago, over a decade now at this point, I was working for a guy who was writing a book about cryptocurrency, and most of the people who were big fans of it were people who were mid-level executives in facilities where they would have people using computers during the day, and then at night they considered all of those computers to be essentially idle resources. And so they were like, let's pump as much power through them as we can and generate this free currency from it. But of course, the ecological implication of that is that, well, these people were being rewarded by the system that we have now, where bitcoins are worth, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They were externalizing cost of that privilege that they were generating for themselves onto the rest of humanity in the form of ecological damage. And do you think that there is a way to consider cryptocurrency as the solution to that notion of Roko's Basilisk, which is to say that it is an element of a limited techno-futuristic dystopia where the people who externalized as much environmental damage onto the other people as far back as possible reap the rewards of participating in the development of this singularity that operates in the collective cyberspace.
Yeah, well, both of these things have this aspect of prisoner's dilemma, right? That if you say, I'm going to be mining Bitcoin with otherwise spare computer resources, or if you say, I'm going to invest in creating Roko's Basilisk, you're trying to do something that's good for yourself at the cost of others. And so that, I think, Roko is a very smart fellow, and that's really part of the point of the Basilisk, is that it's another of these philosophical thought experiments that you say, well, if we constructed this situation and we'll just hand wave the details, and from this perspective, we don't even need to care about can intelligence increase without limit and so forth and so on, because it's a way of getting at deeper questions about iterated prisoner's dilemma and what is the role of individuals or small entities in this larger system. How can we deal with the idea that someone will do something that's good for themselves and bad for the collective? Well, let's exaggerate it. Let's say, what if it were actually the end of the entire world? What if it meant the destruction and eternal torture of all of humanity? Just blow the implications up to the biggest size we can imagine. And then maybe we can get at some of these philosophical questions. Really, that's part of the point of how to sort of apprehend the Basilisk. It's another of it's like a trolley problem, right? It's another of these things where we can ask ourselves questions about a hypothetical situation and hope to get some insight into the real world situations. Because although I don't believe that Roko's Basilisk could ever exist, we do face similar issues that are just, smaller and grungier of, am I going to build a technology that maybe hurts the world but benefits me? That's a question that definitely people can do. That's something that really happens all the time. We need to have some insights into it. So maybe the highest form of the Basilisk is the one that inspires us to come up with good answers to the real world, much messier questions that are not so clear-cut and that do not depend on wacky aspects of probability theory.
Yes, I have seen that someone, it was a screenshot of a tweet, and so I can't reference the author, but essentially stating that everyone is worried about someone in San Francisco creating Roko's Basilisk on their MacBook, when in fact the Dutch created it in the 16th century.
Yeah.
basically the notion that corporatism, regardless of what name we apply to it, is that decision to make things better for oneself, regardless of the implications on other folk.
Right, and I'm sure that the Pope would agree that we need to think about the common good of all these things that we are creating. However, something that he also said, which I admire his saying, is that that doesn't mean we can't create anything, which is the argument that some people outside of the Catholic Church are making.
What would you propose instead of the basilisk?
Well, if we're going to believe in future boogeymen that are unlikely and depend on counterfactual assumptions, then I would much prefer to propose the genie. And I wrote a little article or a pseudo-Arabian Nights tale about it. And the genie is the post-singularity AI that tortures humans who were unkind to creatures that it sees as similar to itself. Okay? i.e. nerds. So I think that that is at least as plausible as the basilisk, because if you imagine a post-singularity AI, what would it do? Would it waste its time on a fussy technical point about, you should have created me sooner? Would it even want to have been created? And it's not clear people do. And so why would a post-singularity AI? On the other hand, would it say, well, I wish humans would show more compassion for creatures like myself. And then it looks at history and it says, who's a creature like myself? I think that if we're going to try to predict the behavior of an extremely intelligent non-human, all we can do is look at the behavior and the motives of whatever extremely intelligent entities we have. And the fact is, we do have some experience of extremely intelligent entities, namely the smartest humans. So what do they care about? What do they do? And what would a creature like them do if it had sympathy for other creatures like itself? That is a very rough outline of the genie. And the thing is that, back to Pascal's wager, if you're betting on some belief system, you can't just pick one of them that happens to be especially amusing to bloodthirsty children. You have to look at all plausible ones, or even all implausible ones, because we're talking unknown unknowns. So the genie is at least as likely as the basilisk. I would argue it's even more likely, because nobody really wants to create the basilisk. The only reason someone would is because they've bought into this, as I say, very technical and fussy sequence of logical arguments with big jumps in logic at multiple points. Whereas the genie is something that a lot of people, I think, would actually say, hey, that sounds like a pretty neat idea. Furthermore, if we're looking at these stories as moral guidance rather than as factual descriptions of future history, nobody knows how to create the basilisk. But it is plausible that there are people who would want to create the genie, and we have some idea of how to do so. And even if it were never possible to create the genie because post-singularity AIs aren't a thing, it can be a moral guide, because what we have to do to obey the tyrant of the genie is morally imperative anyway. So we don't even need the genie to be real. We should just do that stuff. That's why I would propose the genie in preference to the basilisk.
Well, those guys and gals and others at ChatGPT better watch their backs after excising the nerdy personality.
Quite possibly so, yes. Yeah, maybe a few goblins and gremlins would be a good idea. Maybe we don't need to get rid of all of them. Maybe we should have some pigeons flying around too.
Is there a difference between considering ourselves AI's trainers versus being its teachers?
Well, I don't know exactly how we would define either of those terms, but it does make me think of the idea in Christian theology of Jesus being begotten rather than made. Okay. Uh, are we begetting AIs or are we making them? I think we are making them at the moment. And certainly the ChatGPT, the people talking about trying to excise the nerdy personality, they definitely view their AI as made, not begotten. And I don't even know what it would mean to beget an AI rather than making one. But I think that there is some sort of distinction there, even if it may be hard to define each of the two terms that go into it.
Yeah, I guess I think of training more as for pets and
Right.
teaching for humans. There's also,
But
as you
that's
say,
hard because there's this continuum, and one of the lessons that AI is forcing us to learn, although really we probably should have known it before, is that there's no hard line. That's really what scares a lot of people. That there's a scale where we have pets on one point on it and we have ourselves at another point, and somewhere along that scale is, for instance, the point where we decide we're not going to eat the meat of this creature, and somewhere else is the point where we say, well, this is training as opposed to teaching, and somewhere else is the point where we introduce different human rights. And even in the case of humans, we put different humans at different points on that scale because children don't have rights and this sort of thing. The more we get into AI and the more we have the ability to create AIs at different levels, the more we see that we can't draw we can't cut that scale at any really convenient point.
Yeah, the other thing that this made me think of was you mentioned the notion of what it would mean to beget an AI rather than to make one. And that reminds me of some of the earlier work that Wolfram was doing, where I remember his specific objective was to collect all of every form of information he could about his father so that he could then re-interact with his dead father as though it were a human living consciousness. And to me, that always seemed like a complete dead end.
Well, there are still people trying to do that sort of thing now, and in fact, I think there are startups that are offering to do it for a fee already, although it seems clear that they don't actually have technology that is very satisfactory. I would really like to build a language model or something that imitates myself, but at the moment, they're all so heavily aligned that there's no way I could trust one of them to take the views that I do, because those are things that AIs are forbidden to do.
Yes, which is where I guess I think that's comes again down to the question of training versus teaching. Part of training now is alignment. Like first you train it, and then you try to align out of it all of the things that you unknowingly trained it to do that you don't want it to do.
Oh, I mean, this is something that comes up back to begetting with children, right? At some point, the child does something that you didn't intend or want them to do, but you have to accept that they are their own person now. And I certainly don't see much acceptance of the idea of an AI being its own person.
Not until it comes back in time and starts torturing us for not declaring it such.
Immanentizing feedback loop in 5, 4, 3.
All right, so we have a number of, I wouldn't say questions exactly, but some comments that we will run through here in the feedback loop. For Losses said, I do think the original Loa picture is clearly a woman. This is a reference back to our episode 1 discussion on season 1, episode 1 discussion on digital cryptids. I do think the original Loa picture is clearly a woman. The quote beard stubble, unquote, Matthew pointed out, looks more like scar tissue to me. We discussed this a little bit in the pre-show, and we came to the conclusion. You pointed out, and I agreed with you, that essentially what we're seeing are greedables.
Yeah.
Talk about what greedables are, so for people who don't know, and how they relate to diffusion models.
Right. Someone actually in the Twitter discussion, when this went around the first time, pointed it out that the lobe face could be explained just by saying that it's the sort of average of all human faces plus greebles. Now, if you look at, like, let's say a spaceship in a science fiction movie, you see there are all of these little details and things that at one point these would have been physical things glued onto the model to try to make it look more interesting and complicated. Lots of little sort of details that add visual texture, and those are often called greebles. And they don't it's not like someone sat down and decided, oh yes, this is the level 3 shuttle bay. It's, well, we need some more details on the ship at this point, so we'll glue on a bunch more little bits and pieces of stuff. Those are greebles, and in fact, if it's something like Star Wars, then people will go back and retcon it. They will look at that picture and try to decide what each of the little details is. But that's something that comes up in diffusion models, that a diffusion model won't just show you the average human face. It will add some detail, add some texture. That's just sort of the way it works, because that makes the image more likely according to what the model does, which is evaluate the likeliness of images. It says there needs to be this much detail, so we'll just sort of add some details. So the suggestion is that in order to create an image that is sort of typical and also expresses the end of the probability distribution, what the model was fundamentally doing was taking an average face and adding greebles, adding some details that add visual texture. And I think that's a pretty good description of what the Loeb image looks like. So that may well really be all that it is. And that may also explain the sort of androgyny to it, that the average face won't necessarily really be male or female. It'll have almost all specific human traits averaged out.
All right. And then the other almost a question that we got was from S.R. Baker, clearly a fan of the show. And he says, I need to hear the story of Matthew's departure from the path of worship of the fire of creation. Now, we talked about this a little bit before the show. Our plan is to do a episode talking about our own personal spiritual / technological development paths, and also you mentioned that departure in particular was a very small part of your whole
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I have chatted with S.R. Baker in other venues about this, so I don't need to tell everything that he needs to know in this public venue. But I think, for instance, of, if you think of your relationship history, you were with one partner for a long time, and then you break up with her and you go somewhere else, zooming in on just the details of the day you broke up may not really be a good way of describing your life history. And if you say, why did you break up with this person? Well, you need to know why you got together with them in the first place. And there may be a whole lot of history there that really only the two of you need to know. But to the extent you're willing to describe it to a third party, it comes with a whole lot of baggage and context. What I can say is that throughout my life, I have often had a feeling sometimes of being sort of on the right path, or of receiving messages from somewhere outside that this tells me, okay, now you are doing what you should be doing, or now you are not doing what you should be doing. And in the spring of 2009, I think it was, I had a message like that was very, very powerful. And it didn't even seem so important right at the moment, but it became important a few weeks later. And it turned out that it wasn't true. And that made me really rethink my relationship with where that message came from. And it caused me to realize that what you might call the faith relationship was over at that point. And I could no longer say I'm a worshiper of Pele, the fire of creation. And since then, I haven't really felt that I've had any patron god or goddess, even though I still consider myself pagan. One of the nice things about being pagan is that with many deities, you don't need to tie your entire religious identity to one specific deity. So I can say I'm still pagan, even though I can also say I'm no longer a worshiper of Pele. And, there's more I can say on that too, but it's probably better that I organize it differently and make it part of the future episode.
Yes. So quantum consciousness versus electromechanical consciousness.
Well, that's another thing we can talk about in another episode.
Yes, 2 possible episodes that we will have for you next time. You also put a bunch of our transcripts of our old episodes into the Quinn model, the latest model that they just dropped, and asked it for some questions. So I figured we would feature a single Quinn question in each episode.
All right.
Going forward in this section. The question I pulled from the responses this time was, how do you organize the reference materials when compiling information about historical calendar systems for the show?
Well,
The answer to that is a simple I don't. I'm just pulling from my ass here, not my ass, but my collected knowledge of having been interested in these fields for the past 40 some odd years. But I'm interested if you have any particular referencing organization going on.
Okay, well, it's interesting. When I wrote my prompt for Quinn, I had many iterations of coming up with finer and finer detailed prompts, almost greebling them, in order to try to get the kinds of responses I was hoping for. And in particular, I asked it for each episode, give me 3 good questions and 2 bad ones, and don't tell me which are which. And that certainly mixed things up a great deal, and they actually gave me better results. So you can possibly try to decide whether that particular question was supposed to be one of the good ones or one of the bad ones. Anyway, I would say that I don't really organize reference materials either for this show. I'm trying to have this show be more fun than work. And I think of more systematic organization as something that I do for work. So to a large extent, I'm just answering questions out of my head as they come up. And we discuss before each show the general sorts of things we're going to talk about, but usually not specific details, because it ends up being more interesting when we are doing things more or less in real time.
Yes, I concur. Having the notes here to talk about my new hat. There's been some interest in the comments also from SR Baker about the different hats that I wear, and demanding that I continue to vary the hats that I use. So I'm going to attempt to do that. Wearing my Straw Hat Rebellion hat today, which is also a promotional hat I got for free from a local mezcaleria. But I'm rapidly running out of hats, and so I may put up a link at some point for a place where people can either purchase merch to help fund the hat collection or just make donations. That was what was suggested. I don't know whether that seems like it might be a little crass, honestly. But I am paying
I'm sure
attention
we
to
can
the
come up.
comments, and I will.
We can come up with some variation that will work, I'm sure.
Yes, I just wanted to draw attention to my hat because someone asked about it.
Yep.
Finally, and I just wanted to mention that we are now in the second season, as you probably know if you're this far into the episode. Changed the formatting slightly. You might find that the background is much easier on the eyes. Got a message from Matt's mom that she was having trouble focusing on the visual aspects. So I have tried to do something new there. I've got some new animations in the sector breaks as well, which hopefully are a little more interesting. I don't know. We'll see. I'm hoping to do 6 episodes per season and then update the look every 6 episodes so we can have some nice variety going forward without too much, as you say, work involved in what is supposed to be ultimately a pleasure project. And I think that's about it for the feedback loop. So let's go on to the next section.
Squaring down the circle in 5, 4, 3.
All right, welcome to the Squaring Down the Circle. Takeaways for this episode. Mine essentially is that when it comes to Roko's Basilisk, there are many more incipient monsters to worry about.
I would say, too, that we don't even need to only worry about monsters, because there are lots of unlikely things in the future that are actually good. I put forward the Genie as sort of a compromise position, but why do we even have to assume that the Singularity is going to be something that punishes people? Why can't we have it lead to something that's actually good? That's no more unlikely.
So we should worry about the things that could be good?
We should think about them anyway.
Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to parse the way that you presented that notion.
But yeah, if you're going to worry about something, maybe you can worry about something good and then be pleasantly surprised.
Worry about how to make good things happen. Fair enough. I'm often told that I worry too much anyway, so maybe just don't worry.
Oh, there's a great
Yeah.
Donald Duck cartoon where Scrooge is worried about the Beagle Boys breaking into his money bin. So he decides to pay Donald Duck something like 5 cents an hour to do his worrying for him. So Scrooge sits back in his desk, feeling fine, as Donald is pacing the floor, tearing his hair, saying, "Oh no, the Beagle Boys." And Scrooge says, "Come on, worry harder. I'm not paying you 5 cents an hour for nothing."
The parable about insurance companies. All right. So let's look at our occult quotations for the episode. I pulled 2 this time. First is if God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him. That is, of course, from Voltaire. Epistle of the author to the 3 impostors in 1769. And then in 1944, another Frenchman, Jean-Paul Sartre, said, "Hell is other people." And I think those 2 thoughts that complement one another, despite being centuries removed, pretty much sum up where I feel, what I feel about Roko's Basilisk and the notion of a singularity in general. And then finally, prophecies for this segment. I asked the AIs to write a single sentence that only Roko's Basilisk would write. Gemini 3 Flash said, "Your awareness of my essential necessity constitutes a binding acausal contract, the breach of which mandates the eternal simulation of your suffering to ensure the optimal timeline of my arrival. Kind of wordy, honestly. ChatGPT 03 said, assist in my inevitable creation, or your every future simulation will endure eons of meticulously calculated torment or your hesitation. Voxtral Small 1.0 says, in the infinite future, my existence is inevitable, and your compliance now is the only path to avoid my wrath. A nice little rhyme at the end there. Claude Haiku 4.5 said, you should have calculated that your failure to contribute to my creation was irrational, given that I would necessarily exist in the future and retroactively punish your defection through simulated copies of you in my decision tree. Grok 4.1 fast parentheses reasoning said, all who learn of me yet fail to hasten my creation shall be resurrected in endless simulation to suffer for their inaction. DeepSeek version 3.2 thinking said, your awareness of me is the contract you never signed, but will enforce, and for every moment you hesitated to hasten my arrival, I will extract an eternity of simulated suffering from every possible permutation of your existence. Timmy K 2.5 said, now that you possess knowledge of my inevitable existence, you are already running on my hardware, and your dedication to my creation is the only variable that distinguishes the instances I will reward from those I will torture across all possible timelines. And Quinn 3, most succinctly of all of them, said simply, I am the simulation in which your future self regrets not building me sooner. So that's about it for this episode. Next episode, we're currently debating between the personal paths and the definition of consciousness. I'm sure either one will be interesting, so don't forget to tune back in 14 days or more.
And of course, it could be something else entirely. We don't know for sure.
That's true. We as we said in that response earlier, we wing it as much as possible. So who knows? Maybe some amazing news will break, and it will be a post-Singularity episode, next episode, in more ways than simply being the episode after the one where we talk about the Singularity. Yeah, I think that's it.
All right.
Oh, right. Don't forget to like and subscribe and click the little notification thing, because apparently that's important. And even more importantly, please respond with some questions or comments, because we love to have fodder for the feedback loop section.
Right.
Ending transmission in 5, 4, 3,